I remember the moment the courtroom doors opened, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a kind of slow, deliberate arrogance that I have come to recognize over decades on the bench. The kind of entrance that isn't about urgency, but about presence, about being seen. From my bench, elevated yet grounded in the weight of law, I watched her step in, the daughter of a millionaire CEO, a name that had already echoed through the halls of my courtroom long before her heels ever touched the marble floor. She walked as if the room belonged to her, chin slightly raised, lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like a smirk sharpened by entitlement. Her clothing was meticulously expensive, tailored, flawless, the kind of fashion that whispers power without needing to shout. But her attitude screamed louder than any fabric ever could. I have seen many defendants, frightened, broken, defiant. But this one walked in as if this entire process was beneath her. And I remember thinking, very clearly, this will not go the way she expects. I watched her eyes scan the courtroom, not with curiosity, not with concern, but with judgment. Yes, judgment, in my courtroom. Her gaze moved over the benches, the clerks, the officers, and then finally, it landed on me. There was a pause, a fraction of a second, but in that pause, I saw it. The calculation, the dismissal. She tilted her head ever so slightly, as if measuring me, as if deciding whether I was worthy of her attention. I have spent a lifetime earning respect, not demanding it, but I also know when it is deliberately withheld, and in that moment, before a single word was spoken, she had already made her first mistake. My fingers rested calmly on the bench, my expression controlled, my voice still unspoken, but inside, there was a slow, steady tightening. Not anger, not yet, but awareness. The kind of awareness that tells you, this case is not just about facts. It's about character. I remember opening the file, slowly, deliberately, letting the sound of paper against wood fill the silence that had settled over the room. Silence can be powerful. It stretches. It presses against people. It forces them to confront what they would rather ignore. She didn't flinch. Of course she didn't. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, crossing her arms, a subtle gesture, but one that spoke volumes, defensive, dismissive, uninterested. I began reading, not aloud, not yet, but enough to let the gravity of the charges settle into me. Fraud, reckless endangerment, willful destruction of property. Each word carried weight, consequences, lives affected. And yet, when I looked up again, she was still wearing that same expression, that same casual disregard. I leaned back slightly, studying her, and I remember thinking, she has no idea where she is standing. The backstory began to unfold piece by piece, not in rushed summaries, but in slow, deliberate revelations that painted a picture far darker than her polished exterior suggested. I learned how she had used her father's influence, his wealth, his connections, not as a foundation for responsibility, but as a shield against consequence. I read about the business she had been managing, a project handed to her, not earned, and how she had twisted it into something reckless, something dangerous. Contracts ignored, safety regulations dismissed, warnings, repeated warnings, brushed aside with a wave of her hand. I could almost hear it, the casual tone, the arrogance in her voice as she told experienced professionals that she knew better. I have seen this before. Power without wisdom, authority without accountability, and it never ends well. The victim, an employee, a man who had spent years building his career, careful, diligent, respected. His file was thick, not with wrongdoing, but with evidence, emails, reports, documented concerns. He had tried to stop it, tried to warn her again and again, and each time he had been dismissed, not just ignored, but belittled. I read transcripts of their exchanges, her words cutting, sharp, dismissive. You worry too much. Leave the decisions to people who understand business. You're replaceable. Replaceable. I remember that word lingering in my mind, echoing in the quiet of my courtroom. because I have seen what happens when people start believing others are disposable. It leads here, always, to this. When the proceedings began, her lawyer stood quickly, too quickly, as if trying to get ahead of something inevitable. His voice was controlled, practiced, but there was tension there, a tightness around the edges. He knew what he was dealing with. And then she spoke. Without being prompted, without permission, she let out a soft laugh, a laugh in my courtroom. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It cut through the room like a blade. "This is ridiculous," she said, her tone light, almost bored. "Are we really doing this?" I felt the shift. The air itself seemed to tighten. My gaze lifted slowly, deliberately, and I met her eyes again. This time, there was no mistaking it. Disrespect, clear, unfiltered, unapologetic. Her lawyer tried to intervene, whispering urgently, placing a hand near her arm, but she brushed him off. "Relax," she muttered, not even bothering to lower her voice enough. "I've got this." I have heard those words before, from people who had no idea what they were facing. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm, measured, but firm. "You will address this court with respect." A simple statement, a necessary one. She looked at me, really looked this time, and then she smiled. Not politely, not respectfully, but with a kind of amused disbelief. "Respect?" she repeated, tilting her head. For this, the audacity, it was almost impressive. Almost. The details of the incident itself were laid out slowly, painfully, each piece adding weight to what had already begun to settle heavily in the room. A construction site, a project under her authority, safety protocols ignored to cut costs, to speed up timelines, to impress investors, and then the accident. Equipment failure, entirely preventable. The victim, trapped, injured. His life altered in a matter of seconds. I could see it as it was described. The chaos, the panic, the realization that something had gone terribly wrong. And through it all, her decisions, her signatures, her dismissals, all leading to that moment, cause and effect, clear, undeniable. When asked to respond, to explain, she didn't hesitate. "It was an accident," she said, shrugging slightly. "Things happen. Things happen." I felt the words settle, heavy, hollow. Her lawyer closed his eyes briefly, just for a moment, as if bracing himself. "We followed industry standards," she continued, her tone defensive now, but still lacking any real weight of responsibility. "If someone messed up, it wasn't me. Not me. Always not me. I have heard it countless times, but rarely with such confidence, such complete detachment from reality. The victim's presence in the courtroom changed everything, not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. He sat quietly, his posture careful, his movements measured, the result of injuries that had not fully healed. When he was called to speak, there was a shift, a silence that felt heavier than anything before. I watched him stand, slowly, deliberately, and make his way forward. His eyes didn't seek hers, not at first. They remained focused, steady, as if gathering strength with each step. And when he finally spoke, his voice, it carried something no amount of money could ever buy: truth. He spoke of his life before, of routine, of stability, of simple things that now felt distant. He described the moment of the accident, not dramatically but honestly. The fear, the pain, the realization that something fundamental had changed. His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of memory. I felt it, not just as a judge, but as a human being. This is the part people don't see, the part where law meets reality, where decisions made in comfort ripple outward into consequences that cannot be undone. As he continued, the emotional toll became impossible to ignore. Medical bills, mounting, relentless, a career, uncertain, possibly over, a family, affected in ways that go beyond numbers or reports. He paused at one point, just for a second, and in that pause, The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. I glanced at her, just briefly, and what I saw, or rather, what I didn't see, stayed with me. No remorse, no recognition, just impatience. I struggled, not outwardly, not visibly, but internally, to maintain the balance required of my position. A judge does not react, does not allow emotion to dictate outcome, but we are not machines. We hear, we absorb, we understand, and sometimes we see the complete absence of understanding on the other side. That is the hardest part. When she was given another chance to speak, to respond, to acknowledge, she sighed, actually sighed. I'm sorry he got hurt, she said, the words flat, rehearsed, empty, but you can't blame me for everything. I felt something shift then, something final, not anger, but certainty, the kind of certainty that comes when all doubt has been removed. By the time we reached sentencing, the room felt different, heavier, grounded, the weight of everything that had been said, everything that had been revealed, settled into the very structure of the space. I sat there, looking at her, really looking, and I saw it clearly. Not just arrogance, but a complete failure to understand consequence. And that is dangerous. I spoke slowly, deliberately, each word placed with intention. I reminded her of the facts, the evidence, the choices she had made. I dismantled every excuse, every deflection, piece by piece. This court, I said, my voice firm, unwavering, does not operate on entitlement. I saw it then, the first crack, small, but there. Her posture shifted, her expression faltered, just slightly. And you, I continued, leaning forward just enough to let the weight of my words land fully, are not above the law. Silence followed, deep, absolute. I could feel every eye in the room, every breath, waiting. Your actions, I said, each word sharper now, have consequences, real consequences, for real people. I paused, letting it sink in, letting it settle. When I announced the sentence, maximum, full accountability, there was a moment, just a moment, where time seemed to stop. Her eyes widened, the confidence gone, replaced by something raw, something real. Wait! No, you can't! She started, her voice rising, breaking. But I had already spoken. The decision was made. The transformation was immediate and complete. Shock gave way to panic, panic to desperation. This is insane! Do you know who I am? She demanded, her voice cracking, losing its edge. I watched, calmly, as the reality she had so casually dismissed finally caught up with her. Please, there has to be something. We can fix this. The arrogance, gone, replaced by fear. The bailiff stepped forward, steady, professional, and placed a hand on her arm. She resisted at first, pulling back, shaking her head, but there was nowhere left to go. No, this isn't happening, she whispered, her voice trembling now, tears forming, spilling. I watched as she was led away, the sound of her protests fading, replaced by the quiet finality of consequence. Months later, I heard updates, appeals denied, reputation shattered. The company distancing itself, the father's influence unable to undo what had been done, actions, consequences, always, and the victim, slowly rebuilding, not fully healed, perhaps never fully, but moving forward, supported, recognized, his voice heard, justice, not perfect, but real. I have seen many cases, many people, many outcomes, but this one stayed with me because it was never just about the law. It was about understanding, or the lack of it. And if there is one truth I have learned, one truth that echoes long after the courtroom empties, it is this: no amount of money can buy you freedom from consequence. Because in the end, character is the only thing that stands when everything else falls. Months passed, quietly, steadily, the way time does when it is no longer being measured in moments of arrogance, but in the slow, unavoidable ticking of consequence. And from my bench, though the courtroom had long since moved on to other cases, other names, other stories, I found myself remembering her, not constantly, not obsessively, but in fragments, in reflections that surfaced whenever I saw another defendant walk in with that same dangerous confidence. I had received the official updates, of course, the appeal filings, the denials, the legal language that attempts to reshape reality into something more favorable. But reality, as I have always known, does not bend so easily. Her legal team had tried everything: procedural arguments, technicalities, even subtle attempts to frame her as misunderstood rather than responsible, but the facts remained unmovable, unshakable. And each denial carried with it a little more weight, a little more finality. I remember reading the last appeal decision. The language precise, firm, no ambiguity, no room for reinterpretation. It was over, truly over. I also remember the reports that followed, not official court documents this time, but the quiet murmurs that find their way through the legal system, the stories that don't make headlines, but are known among those who watch closely. Her father, the powerful CEO, had tried, at first, to exert influence, not directly, not in ways that could be proven, but through channels that had always worked for him before. Calls were made, meetings requested, pressure applied in subtle, calculated ways. But this was not a boardroom, not a business deal, not a negotiation that could be swayed by wealth or reputation. This was the law, and the law, when upheld correctly, does not recognize status. I was told that his frustration grew, that his usual confidence began to crack. Not publicly, of course, never publicly, but behind closed doors, where the reality of power's limits becomes impossible to ignore. Even he, a man who had built an empire, was forced to confront something he could not control. As for her, the transformation did not happen overnight. It never does. People like her, they do not change in an instant, not truly. At first, there was resistance, anger, disbelief that lingered even after the cell doors closed behind her. I was told she argued constantly, with staff, with other inmates, with anyone who represented the system she had spent her life believing she was above. She demanded special treatment, expected recognition, clung to the identity that had once shielded her from consequence. But walls, real walls, have a way of stripping those illusions away. There are no executive privileges behind bars, no tailored suits, no private offices, no deferential glances, just structure, just rules, just reality, repeated day after day until it begins to sink in. And then, slowly, something shifted. Not dramatically and not in a way that would make headlines or inspire speeches, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. The reports changed in tone. Less about defiance, more about withdrawal. Less about confrontation, more about silence. I have seen this pattern before. The moment when resistance becomes exhaustion, when denial gives way to something quieter, something more dangerous in a way, reflection. I do not romanticize it. I do not assume redemption where it has not been earned, but I recognize the signs. The absence of arrogance, even if temporary, is the first step toward understanding. Whether she would take the next step, that remained to be seen. The victim's journey, on the other hand, was one of slow, deliberate rebuilding. I received updates through follow-up proceedings, compensation hearings, compliance reviews, the mechanisms that ensure justice is not just declared but carried through. He had undergone multiple treatments, physical therapy, ongoing care, the kind of recovery that is measured not in days or weeks, but in persistence. I remember reading one report in particular, a note from a medical professional describing his progress. Limited, but meaningful. Those words stayed with me. Limited, because some damage cannot be undone. Meaningful, because even in loss there can be movement forward. He had returned, in part, to work, not in the same capacity, not with the same ease, but with determination. And that, more than anything, spoke to his character. There was a moment, months later, when he returned to my courtroom for a final administrative matter. It was brief, procedural, but when he stood there again, I saw the difference. Not just in his physical presence, though that was evident, but in his eyes. There was still pain there, yes, still the echo of what had been taken from him, but there was also something else, strength, quiet, steady strength, the kind that does not need to announce itself. He didn't look at me for validation, didn't seek acknowledgement, but when our eyes met, just for a second, there was understanding, not gratitude, not exactly, but recognition. The system had worked, imperfectly perhaps, but it had worked. I found myself reflecting more deeply during those months, not just on this case, but on the patterns it represented. I have presided over countless hearings, seen countless faces, heard countless stories, but certain cases, they linger, not because they are unique in their facts, but because they reveal something fundamental about human nature. Entitlement, when left unchecked, grows. It expands, distorts perception, erodes accountability. And when it finally collides with reality, the impact is rarely gentle. I have always believed that the courtroom is not just a place of judgment, but a place of revelation. People show you who they are, not just through their actions, but through their reactions to consequence. There were days when new defendants would stand before me, carrying that same air of invincibility, that same quiet assumption that somehow they would be the exception. And each time, I remembered her, not as an individual, but as a reminder that arrogance is not strength, that wealth is not immunity, that confidence without accountability is nothing more than a fragile illusion waiting to break. I never referenced her case directly. That is not my role. But the lessons, they informed the way I watched, the way I listened, the way I spoke. And sometimes, in the quiet moments after a session ended, when the courtroom emptied and the echoes of voices faded into silence, I would sit there for a while, just reflecting on the weight of the decisions, on the lives they affect, on the responsibility that comes with this position. It is easy from the outside to see judgment as simple, as binary, right or wrong, guilty or innocent, but it is never that simple. It is layered, complex, filled with nuance and consequence that extend far beyond the moment a sentence is delivered. And yet, there are times, rare but undeniable, when the clarity is absolute, when the line between accountability and denial is so stark that there is no room for hesitation. This case was one of those times. And as I sit here now, thinking back, not as a judge delivering a ruling, but as a person who has witnessed the full arc of cause and effect, I am reminded of something that cannot be written into law, but is present in every case nonetheless. The truth that no title, no wealth, no influence can shield a person from the reality of their own choices. Because in the end, when the noise fades, when the power disappears, when the illusions are stripped away, all that remains is who you chose to be when you thought no one could hold you accountable.